As parents, we naturally celebrate our children's milestones. The first word, the first steps, the first time they quietly play on their own. When friends or family say, "Your child is so independent," "You're lucky, they're so easy to manage," it feels like you're doing something right. And sometimes, you are. But sometimes the behaviors that look impressive on the surface deserve a second look. That doesn't mean something is wrong. Children develop at different speeds, and every child has a unique personality. The purpose of this video isn't to make you anxious. It's to help you notice the small signals children sometimes give before bigger challenges appear. Because when children need a little extra support, recognizing it early can make a world of difference. So today, let's look at 5 toddler behaviors that many parents celebrate but shouldn't ignore. And the first one is probably the easiest to misunderstand. Every parent appreciates a little peace and quiet. Your toddler picks up a few toys, sits on the floor, and happily entertains themselves for 20 or 30 minutes. No crying, no constant interruptions, no endless requests for attention. People notice, too. Mine would never do that. For many children, that's completely normal. Some simply enjoy independent play more than others. But here's the question worth asking. When your child discovers something exciting, do they try to share it with you? Imagine they've built the tallest tower they've ever made. Do they turn around with a huge smile, as if to say, "Look what I did"? Or maybe they spot a butterfly, a colorful balloon, or a dog running through the park. Do they glance back at you, just to make sure you saw it too? That tiny moment may not seem important, but it's one of the earliest building blocks of communication. Children don't just learn by exploring the world, they learn by sharing it. Before a toddler says, "ball," they usually look at the ball, then back at their parent, almost inviting them into the moment. They're discovering that experiences become more meaningful when they're shared. Now, imagine the opposite. Your child becomes completely absorbed in playing. You quietly leave the room. They don't notice. They rarely try to show you something they've discovered. Does that automatically mean something is wrong? Not at all. Some children are naturally quiet. Others become deeply focused while they play. But if you consistently notice that your child rarely tries to include you in their excitement, it's worth paying attention. Because that desire to share experiences helps build communication, social skills, and emotional connection. The good news is that these moments can be encouraged naturally. Read books together. Play simple turn-taking games. Sit beside your child and follow their lead instead of directing every activity. Celebrate what captures their attention. Those everyday moments teach children that sharing their world with someone they love feels rewarding. And if you're ever unsure whether your child's development is on track, don't rely on comparisons with other children. Every child follows a different path. A conversation with your pediatrician can provide reassurance and, if needed, guide you toward the right support. Because the question isn't, "Is my child different?" It's, "What is my child trying to communicate?" And speaking of communication, the next sign surprises many parents. Because some toddlers know hundreds of words, yet still struggle to use language in the way that matters most. One of the first things parents proudly talk about is how many words their toddler knows. They can name every animal. They know all the colors. They've memorized the alphabet. And those are wonderful milestones. But there's an important difference between knowing words and using them. Imagine you're reading a picture book together. You point to a lion. Your toddler immediately says, "lion." You turn the page. "Elephant," "monkey," "giraffe." It feels like they're learning incredibly fast. Now imagine you're walking through the zoo a few days later. A real lion is standing just a few feet away. Your child looks at it, they smile, but they never point. They never say, "lion." They never look back at you to share the excitement. The word is there, but the communication isn't. Children don't learn language simply to name things. They learn language to connect with people. When a toddler points at an airplane and excitedly shouts, "Plane!" they're not trying to show how much they know. They're inviting you into the moment. They're saying, "Did you see that too?" That's what communication is really about. Not collecting words, but sharing experiences. Some toddlers also repeat everything they hear. You ask, "Do you want some milk?" They answer, "Milk." You say, "Time for bed." They repeat, "Bed." During early language development, this can be completely normal. It's one of the ways children practice language. The important question is this: do they also use those words on their own? Do they ask for milk when they're thirsty? Do they point at a bird outside the window and say, "Bird"? Do they use words to tell you what they're thinking, or only to repeat what they've heard? That's the difference parents should watch for. Because communication isn't measured by how many words a child knows. It's measured by how they use those words to connect with the people around them. If you're unsure, don't panic. Children develop language at different speeds. But if your child rarely uses words to communicate naturally, it's worth mentioning it to your pediatrician. Sometimes all they need is a little extra support, and early support can make an incredible difference. Now let's move to another behavior that creates daily frustration in so many homes: picky eating. Almost every parent has heard someone say, "Don't worry, it's just a phase." And very often, it is. But sometimes there's a little more to the story. One week, your toddler happily eats strawberries. The next week, they won't even touch them. Yesterday, they loved scrambled eggs. Today, they push the plate away. Pasta? No. Chicken? No. Vegetables? Absolutely not. Before long, every mealtime starts feeling like a negotiation. The truth is, most toddlers become picky eaters. As they grow more independent, they also become more cautious about trying unfamiliar foods. For many children, this phase comes and goes. Foods disappear for a while, then quietly make their way back onto the menu. That's usually reassuring. But here's something worth paying attention to. Is your child's list of accepted foods changing, or is it only getting smaller? Some children go through phases. Today, they refuse bananas. A few weeks later, they're happily eating them again. But for other children, once a food disappears, it never returns. Then another food disappears, and another. Slowly, their list of accepted foods becomes smaller and smaller. You may also notice that the foods they do eat have something in common: plain pasta, crackers, bread, chicken nuggets, foods that look, feel, and taste almost exactly the same every time. For some children, that predictability feels safe. It's not about being spoiled. Their brain may simply experience certain textures, tastes, or smells much more intensely than other children do. Imagine if every bite felt completely different. One bite is smooth, the next is sticky, another is unexpectedly crunchy. Eating could quickly become overwhelming. That doesn't mean every picky eater has a sensory difficulty. Most don't. But if your child's food choices continue shrinking, or meal times become stressful day after day, it's worth asking your pediatrician for guidance. With the right support, many children gradually become more comfortable exploring new foods. Because the goal isn't to force children to eat everything. It's to help them feel safe enough to become curious again. And curiosity is often the first step toward confidence. The next sign is one that many parents don't think twice about because it looks completely harmless. When toddlers first learn to walk, their movements are still developing. They wobble, they stumble, and sometimes they walk on their toes. For a while, that's completely normal. As their balance improves, Most children naturally begin placing their heels on the ground. But what if they don't? What if walking on their toes becomes their usual way of moving? Many parents don't think much of it. After all, their child is still running, climbing, playing. They seem perfectly happy. But persistent toe walking can sometimes be a sign that something deserves a closer look. For some children, it may simply be a habit they'll outgrow. For others, it can be related to tight muscles or the way their nervous system processes movement and sensation. The important thing isn't trying to figure out the cause yourself. It's simply noticing the pattern. Does your child walk on their toes once in a while, or do they spend most of the day walking that way? If it only happens occasionally, especially during play, it's usually nothing to worry about. But if toe walking becomes their normal way of walking or continues well beyond the toddler years, it's worth mentioning during your next visit to the pediatrician. Because sometimes small concerns are much easier to address when they're noticed early. The final sign is one that many parents never think about, because it doesn't happen while children are awake. It happens while they're asleep. Most parents have stood beside their child's bed at night, just watching them sleep. It's one of the quietest moments of the day, so hearing the occasional snore during a cold usually isn't a concern. But if your child snores almost every night, it's worth paying attention. Children aren't meant to snore regularly. Sometimes frequent snoring can mean their airway is partially blocked while they sleep. That doesn't always wake them up, but it can stop them from getting the deep, restful sleep their growing brain and body need. And here's the surprising part. The effects often show up the next day. Your child seems unusually emotional. Small disappointments become huge meltdowns. They struggle to focus. Or they seem tired one moment and incredibly energetic the next. It's easy to assume these are simply behavior problems. But sometimes, poor quality sleep is playing a much bigger role than we realize. The good news is that regular snoring often has very treatable causes. Things like enlarged tonsils, allergies, or enlarged adenoids. That's why it's worth mentioning to your pediatrician. Because improving a child's sleep doesn't just help them rest better. It can also improve their mood, their learning, and their ability to manage big emotions. If there's one thing I hope you remember from today's video, it's this. Children don't always tell us they need help with words. Sometimes they tell us through the way they play, the way they communicate, the foods they avoid, the way they move, or even the way they sleep. That doesn't mean every unusual behavior is a red flag. Far from it. Every child develops at their own pace. But when something feels persistent, or your instincts tell you that something isn't quite right, don't ignore that feeling. Asking questions doesn't make you an anxious parent. It makes you an attentive one. Because the goal isn't to search for problems. The goal is to understand your child a little better today than you did yesterday. Sometimes, that understanding becomes the very thing that changes their future. Until next time, keep looking beyond the behavior. Because every behavior is a window into your child's world.